Hi, I'm Katherine Kowalchuk. Thank you, Monique, for allowing me to speak today and to talk about a very important topic about family law and men's rights and men's experience within the court system with respect to family law matters and divorce. I want to keep this session very informal. My experience is that we learn through the experience of others. So feel free to share your experience, and I will do the same with mine, both personal and professional. A little bit about myself. I've been practicing law for over 15 years. The first 9 or 10 or so were in big law firms where I practiced in commercial real estate and banking. And then in 2010, 2011, started my own law firm. It was known at the time as Law Boutique and Divorce Inc. With a K, so I&K, and we were a full service firm, but I did have a family law marketing component of it because divorce is quite a big industry, as we can all probably appreciate. Even if you're not going through a divorce, if you're in a relationship and have property and/or children, you're going to probably need a lawyer at some point in the separation or divorce process, most typically. So, and then about a year and a half ago, I rebranded my firm, downsized significantly, and started practicing in my house, actually, and decided that I would focus exclusively on family law matters. Part of the reason was so that I could raise my 2 children and have a flexible schedule, but also it's such a vast area as well, and I like to focus on one area of law right now, especially because there's one of me to go around. So I enjoy family law. It's a very it's a challenging area to practice in. There's high emotions. People aren't typically in a really good place. And so a lot of my practice is working with my clients to develop a trusting relationship, but also to allow them to see their part in the conflict that they find themselves in, because we all are part of a dynamic relationship. When we divorce or separate in that relationship, we, just by virtue of us being present, have a role to play in the dynamic of that. So I've been divorced once. I'm on my second divorce myself. The first divorce was about 12 years ago. There were no children. We were both lawyers. We both decided that was it. It was pretty clean, and we went our own separate ways. This last divorce that I'm going through right now is a little bit more complicated. I have children involved, and I can really say that I've learned a lot, not only from this experience and how I approach family law matters with my clients, but also I learn a lot from my family law clients, because I see the struggles that they go through every day, and I can relate in real life to what's going on. I do go to court. My experience with court is that it's really a crapshoot, and that's very frustrating for clients to hear. It's expensive, there's time delays, there's a bias. And so our topic here specifically today is around men and divorce and family law matters. And I do see a bias within the court system and in society generally. And so when I met up with Cafe to begin with, I was very intrigued by the message, and I watched The Red Pill as well, and highly motivated to stand behind this cause. Personally, I have a son who's 5, and so when I talked with my mom about my increasing involvement with Cafe, she kind of said, well, Catherine, you're a single mom, you're a professional, do you really need to take anything else on here? And I said, yeah, I do, because I have a son, and I don't want him to go through what other men are going through right now, and more needs to be done. And I advised her of the red pill, and I encouraged both my mom and dad to watch it, and they did, and they were absolutely moved by the message, as I was, because I had no idea the extent of the marginalization, the discrimination that goes on with men in our world. And I had known partly and intuitively understood that there were issues, but that film really did a great job highlighting the duality that we face in this world. So when I decided to rebrand to WHAM Family Law, a lot of my messaging became centered around wanting to practice law in a way that was more heart-centered and from a place that fed my soul. So I decided at that point to create a conscious conflict resolution program. And I have some of my cards, and feel free to take them on your way out. But I created WHAM Family Law, and WHAM stands for We All Matter. But I also created WHAM Healing Center. And WHAM Healing Center houses WHAM Family Law as a service that we provide under the WHAM Healing Center. And WHAM Healing Center is really about offering non-mainstream services to people to help them expand their consciousness. Part of the services that WHAM offers is the Conscious Conflict Resolution Program, and it's something that I speak about. The message is around responsibility, really, and my personal opinion about how our society has, the framework of our society, and in the messages that we're told, there's a huge lack of accountability and responsibility. I find that a lot of people shirk, and it's easier to point a finger at somebody else for what's wrong with me and what's going on in my world. And so when I developed this program, it was very mindful in terms of looking through people's value systems. So we talk about understanding values. We do a consciousness inventory about relationships in your life, and specifically how those relationships, whether they're work, family, extended family, institutions, how those relationships are affected by our behavior and our contribution to the relationship. And it's quite quite a humbling experience, and that is the real point of the program, because family law is very conflict-based, as is most litigation. But I find with divorce, there's so many moving parts with divorce and separation, or even if you are separated and you're trying to manage child support or child access issues, there's a lot of the conflict rests in a state of fear, and people are in a state of fear and may not even know that they're in a state of fear when they come to a family law lawyer to try to resolve their issue. And money is a huge motivator for fear, lack thereof, and then people are more apt to blame the other person for the dynamic of the situation. So I try to help my clients go through the exercise of looking at their role in the relationship, and then based on their that experience, my experience has been with my clients that they experience humility, as I've stated, and that helps to diffuse the conflict. Because now, if Jim and Jane are fighting, and Jim realizes that, well, I see now what I've done or how I've contributed to this relationship, whether it's I buried my head in the sand, I incited jealousy, I withheld money. There's these things that we do subconsciously that when we when we actually sit down and think purposefully about how we are contributing and our behaviors are contributing to the dynamic of a relationship, people feel a sense of, well, like I said, sense of humility, and are then less likely to keep the finger pointed at Jane. And because when one finger's pointing at Jane, 3 are pointing back, right? And then one of the symbols that I use in my speaking is with the thumb up, and the thumb up for me represents, you know, our responsibility to have a more conscious connection with source, whatever that is for you, but to be more mindful in our practices and our behaviors on a daily basis. So because of my desire to want to fulfill happiness in my life, and also because I saw my clients struggling with the resolution that they were getting. So even if I was able to obtain the divorce judgment or the court order for child support or the separation agreement, they were still left with, now what? Because there's no services really, and people don't talk about what happens after all of this is done. And we're so emotionally charged during the experience of going through the litigation that I just found like there was a massive gap that people needed assistance with. And so WAM Healing Center, when it deals with non-mainstream modalities, so we don't do mediation, we do introspection, and we do a lot of things around energy work that people might deem to be woo-woo, but I know for myself, I've had great success in understanding myself better, having gone through and trying out these different modalities, such as like Reiki or mediumship or things like that you wouldn't think would actually have an effect on on changing your perspective, but it's all internal work that we have to do. So that's a little bit about the conscious conflict resolution program, and I believe that when people do the work internally and understand that love comes from within, and that we have to derive our happiness and our state of joy from within, we have no other option but to do things that evoke that. And these are some of the things that mainstream society dismisses as not being legitimate, for fear that they actually work, in my opinion. So about 6 months ago, throughout my journey, I've been my own journey of grieving my relationship, of grieving the divorce, especially with 2 children. I went through massive ups and downs, and I started doing a lot of seeking about disclosure, a lot of seeking about what we're being told by the government, financial institutions, you name it. I was just kind of absorbing all of this information, and I decided that really what we've been fed is a bunch of bullshit. And so I created one day Say No to Bullshit, and it's saynotobullshit.com, and the essence of the website is about seeking out truth. So I don't have an opinion per se, although I do on many things, but my real reason for starting Say No to Bullshit was to help kickstart the discussion about various topics that need to be brought to light. So on the website and what I blog about ranges from everything from boundaries to what's happening on a government level to what's happening, are there extraterrestrials in the sky? Like there's a gamut of things that I want to discuss. And I'm not married to the truth, no pun intended for today's audience, but I just want to know what it is. And is truth subjective? So I'm having a lot of fun with Say No to Bullshit, and I'm hoping to merge that into something a little bit more formalized called Veritas Coalition, and perhaps even parlay that into the political arena as well. But it's not quite there yet. But it is a blog forum for people to submit their ideas and to state their truth. And then I really leave it up to the public, the audience, to determine whether or not that resonates and whether or not they feel it's bullshit or not. As long as it's not hateful, it's going to get published on LinkedIn and Facebook and on the website. So I just wanted, that's a little bit about me and kind of what I stand for. But I would like to get a sense from the audience where you're at or what your experience is in family law matters, if any. Yeah, Monique?
Well, I was wondering, because a lot of men have told me from their experiences with family law that it's just like very, like they just feel like they're being chewed up between cogs in a wheel. What would you say, is there any online or like any kind of resources, like a first aid kit where they can go just to get some information, or like what would you suggest to kind of, I mean, I don't know how, like you said, like sometimes it seems very unstable, like it's very hard to go through a divorce and there is no certainty, but is there anywhere that men can go as a resource, like first to get some information, or like just a place to start?
Well, from a public resource perspective, not really. There's a family law center within the Calgary Court Center, which is for general information. And I have clients that are both male and female, but one of the biggest questions I have at the start or middle of a file is will if I move out of the matrimonial home or the shared relationship home, do I lose access to my children? And the short answer is no. However, there's so many factors that go into it, and there's a lot of fear around that particular issue. My approach to it is to try to solidify an agreement with your ex as soon as possible. Moving out does not take away your rights to the children whatsoever. But the reality is, and my experience has been, that the court system is quite biased in terms of what that relationship looks like, and it's a fight in order to get there. So unless there's an agreement between two parties, I kind of recommend using the court system, even though it is not completely, but mostly backwards, in my opinion. It is a good resource to operate as a hammer and to impose deadlines on people going through the process. So if you file a court application early on for your parenting and support rights, then we can use the time in between in anticipation of the court date to try to negotiate a settlement. And that's kind of been my approach. But I guess in answer to your question, I think that even though it's recommended, and I really prefer clients to try to resolve matters between themselves, if you can't, my recommendation is to seek out legal advice as soon as possible. Because even though you do have inherent rights as a dad, it's always important. Every situation is different. And so the age of the children factors in, the dynamic of the family household. Is one parent working? What is the income flow? So it's always a good choice, I think, to seek out that legal advice, despite the fact that lawyers, have the reputation of being expensive. sometimes decisions that are made in good faith without knowing your legal rights have come back to bite you in the future, and you end up spending more money writing something that you thought was going to be right, that ends up being wrong. So seek out the professional advice as soon as possible. The Calgary Family, the Family Center at the courts is okay, but they don't give out legal advice. So they're a good resource for the process of how you might commence a family law application or how to finish your divorce documents, but they won't give you the legal advice that you need. Yes?
Question. Two-part question.
Of course.
First part, you mentioned a couple of times that the court system is biased against men.
Yeah.
So the first question, Christine?
Catherine,
sorry, my apologies.
That's okay.
Is, do you think it's biased or do you think it's corrupt?
Well, I mean,
and you don't have to answer that if it's in any way.
I don't think you can. I wouldn't describe it as corrupt. I think that they are doing the best that they can do within the confines that the law permits.
Okay. So
but to that point, there's a giant backlog with family law files, and something that my clients don't like to hear, and you might find controversial, is that the reason why there's such a backlog, in part, has to do directly with the clients.
Okay. Thank you. My second question. When people talk about the court system, many people in their mind think in court system being judges and lawyers. For myself, I differentiate. There's the court system, and then there's the legal system, which is the lawyers included with the court system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, do you think that the legal system, meaning the lawyers, many of the lawyers, do you believe that they're corrupt?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. I think of course there's always a bad seed in any batch of professionals, but I think that lawyers really do try to do their best to help their client. Like, part of the problem I see it stems back from, we're coming out of a patriarchal era, right? So where minority voices and female voices weren't heard and involved with the creation of what we see today, right? Our governments, our legislative system, the laws. But we have this system, and we're working within that framework.
Which is biased.
As you said. Yeah, it has elements of that.
I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just trying to get some clarification.
There are biases. I mean, there's a case, and I don't have it on the top of my head, but the name off, but I can provide it to you after, where it was very clear that there was parental alienation happening on behalf of the mother with the children, and a psychologist report confirming that, and a whole bunch of other things that were found to be going on in the mom's home, and she had primary care of the children, and despite that, she still maintained custody of the kids.
Okay.
I mean, there's things that happen like that all the time, and for whatever reason, judges are human and fallible. So when I read that decision, it was quite outrageous. It's actually on my Facebook page, because, with all the evidence to the contrary, and a recognition by the court that there was parental alienation occurring, the status quo remained. And how frustrating that is for the father. And like, most of my clients now are actually men. And so what I see with my clients is, just because my starting point is, just because you're female does not give you automatic entitlement to primary care of the children. That's my position.
That's your position.
And that is a starting point for a lot of lawyers as well. But every situation is different. So when you have small children, for instance, like if you have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, well, their needs are different than a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, right? But one of the other things that I want to talk about today, which is a little bit, and I alluded to a little bit earlier, was the notion of client responsibility and the client's contribution to the dynamic of the litigation. Because when you have two opposing parties that are not willing to agree and are like stuck in their position, there's no other option but to go to the courts to
actually,
resolve
even if you
them.
only have one.
Pardon me?
If you have one of those two opposing
Exactly.
parties who doesn't want to agree,
Well, exactly.
it goes to court.
Exactly. So unfortunately,
So the majority of time, would you find that that's would you say the majority of the time that opposing party would be the female?
no,
According to statistics, saying the majority of divorce cases are brought up, introduced by women.
no. No, well, my experience, and I can only speak to my practice, my experience is that, well, first of all, let's start at the starting point. You have to, if you're in a divorce scenario, if you're getting divorced, you need to file a statement of claim for divorce.
Right.
So by nature of that document, it says on the face of it, you are being sued. And so that document is very scary to people who don't understand that this is a formality, really, that we need to do to get divorced. So my personal opinion around that is that process should change some way, shape, or form, because you're automatically thrown into a court system where the rules of evidence and the rules of court they're adhered to, but oftentimes relaxed because of the nature and dynamic of the family relationship and the nature of trying to do things that are in the best interest of the children. So that document, when you file a statement of claim for divorce, it brings you right into the court system, and you can't get out of it. With common law relationships, it's not necessarily the case, but if you cannot come to an agreement with your ex, then you're going to find yourself there. That being said, I find that most of my clients and my experience has been women tend to use children as leverage, and men use money as leverage. That's the dynamic. And that's just been my experience.
In common law.
And in marriage.
Okay.
For sure. So, because there's the underlying
Women use
fear.
children because they can.
Well,
what I'm trying to get at
sorry, yeah.
is in the court system, in the legal system, I talked about judges, lawyers, that's one role. Judges is one separate, then the lawyers, who are your first contact, represent you in court. And then there's another system out there, of course. I don't even know what the word, but if a woman decides to go to an emergency shelter or something, she can get a lot of assistance in moving in that direction. They get a lot of consulting, a lot of coaching in that area. So, according to every statistic that I've ever read in the last 10 years, 75% of cases that are brought to court, custody cases, are initiated by women.
They could be.
And from my experience, personal experience, because I've been involved in this in a number of years, talking to people on a one-on-one basis, I've seen the exact same thing. Now, the causes of that divorce, that's more specific. Those are the specific instances. But most of the time, there's a thing called primary care.
Mm-hmm.
People get introduced. There is a thing called primary care.
Yeah.
So, I think it's common knowledge that the majority of time women get primary care. The majority of time.
I would probably agree with that.
Yeah. So, is it biased? Is it corrupt? Or is it just the way the system was and we're not out of it yet? But as it sits today, if a man and a woman, as it sits today, from everything I've learned, everything I've observed, the majority of the time it's initiated by women. And this is not against women. I hope it doesn't.
Yeah, but it's free to you to initiate it too.
What's that?
It's free to men to initiate it.
It's free for men?
Yes,
I'm free to initiate.
You're free to initiate.
I understand I have that choice.
Yeah.
But the majority of them are initiated by women because whoever gets custody, the majority of time, there's a lot of financial benefits for it.
Well, that's part of it. I mean,
there's a lot of responsibility.
You can't
I guess what I'm trying to say is that they don't have a 50-50 default custody position.
No, because that's not the test.
Right.
The test is the best interest of the children.
But most statistics and most tests say that would be, as the default position, would be the best position to start with.
Well, it's certainly the starting position that I start with.
That you believe, yes.
And a lot of decisions from judges would agree to that. But because family law is so dynamic, every situation is different. So,
the underlying causes of divorce, you mean? And
the dynamics, like
jobs, careers.
Exactly. Like, is dad working? Is mom working? How old are the children? What are the needs of the children? Are there special needs for the children? What's been the dynamic? I mean, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of that stat. It may be because we're still stuck, and this is a different issue, but related. We are still very much a society attached to gender roles.
Yes.
So, and we conduct ourselves that way, regardless of the fact that the women's rights movements and women becoming more incorporated into the workforce and contributing to our economy and society from an employment standpoint. There's still the gender roles and the expectations, right? And so I believe the more that men and women assume that dualistic, polarized position, where this is a man's job, this is a woman's job, and until we actually understand that we are one and that we all have a common purpose, it's going to be very difficult to change the current structure of these gender roles and the values and the structure that flows from that.
Meaning, because you said you may want to get involved politically later.
Perhaps, yeah.
Meaning, are you saying that the default position of 50-50 equal share of parenting being the starting position to start from, we're not near that yet?
I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that for certain that is the approach for all lawyers and all judges.
No, I'm not saying that 50-50 custody can be achieved at all times. What I'm saying is that the default position being you start out with the courts, that would be the court's intention.
No, I don't think you're looking at, with all due respect.
Yeah.
The test is the best interest of the children. Whether or not 50-50 access is in the best interest of the children is determined on a case-by-case basis. So that's how the courts look at it. And so I think if you reflected on your personal situation, or one reflected on their personal situation.
I will say something. This is something I've never ever interrupted. I don't believe that the courts, this is my personal opinion and my experience, and everybody I've ever talked to, I don't think the courts give a crap about the best interests of the children, and I'll tell you why. Because I've never had anybody come and ask me questions about my children. I've never had anybody in a long process, and many people I know, ever come and ask me any other question once they got what they wanted. People say they sit up there.
Once you got what they wanted, the opposing party?
The prevailing party who normally prevails. Yeah. I know in my situation, it had nothing to do with the best interests of my children. I can prove it. But stop me at every step along the way.
Right, and so
And not just me, because I'm
I
involved with
understand
this.
it. I understand
with many people, many men. But so I asked one question, and you brought it over to the best interest of the children. I don't really believe it is. That's just my opinion. That's
Well,
just
and
my
that very
my
well,
observation.
and that very well could be your experience. And I'm not saying that wasn't your experience, because I hear that a lot. And so that's why I believe that there's a problem with the court system.
Yes.
And sometimes it is first in time, receive the benefit, right? So she's making the application for support and for access. She's first in time. You're responding. Just the psychological optics of that are play a role as well. So I don't agree necessarily that when I'm in court, when I'm in a family law chambers application, I hear all the time, and the test is always the best interest of the children. However, there are certainly pieces that fall through the cracks.
Yeah, like
Definitely.
So I understand where you're coming from a personal point of view. I believe that you sound like a fair person. You think that, hey, if a child has two parents who are kind, good parents, and they love
That should be
their
the
children,
starting point.
they should both have access to those children, and then of course access to those children, ongoing access. I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
And
where the system
but when you're
fails
battling in a
us,
system
Where
that's
this-
already set up and designed, working on a bias, when you enter into that, you're at a huge disadvantage.
well, it's not only the bias that kind of is the underlying, like, that inherently kind of is supported of these policies and how decisions are made. It's there's a financial component to it as well. So I think the courts look to the best interest of the children in the ought to be, because that is the test. But in order to prove it, courts and judges often need third-party reports. Those third-party reports with psychologists, for instance, to determine what the best interest of the child is for that family are expensive. And so therefore, automatically, because of the expense, the report isn't completed. The dad is left relinquishing full 50-50 access, in a healthy, optimal scenario, because they don't want to go through that expense, or can't. Not that they don't want to, but they just can't, because it's
expensive.
It's expensive. So there's that obstacle as well for people. And also, the type of lawyer and the person that you get to advocate for you is important as well. Like, not all lawyers have the same approach. And so some enjoy letter writing campaigns and actually get nothing done in the time frame that they're representing you. And so you'll spend tens of thousands of dollars to be exactly in the same position you were when you engaged that lawyer. No, but there are lawyers, and my style is to be more proactive, and a lot more proactive, and trying to get you in and out of my office as soon as possible. But the system is flawed, and as much as that can be my approach, just like I can ask my client or help my client to approach the conflict from a reasonable standpoint by taking responsibility for his or her role in it, we're still dealing with another unknown factor, right? That other party or that other lawyer contributes to the dynamic of the family law matter, and could make it very difficult.
Mm-hmm. So,
Monique just had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, I think you're a lawyer with a lot of integrity, and I love your program that you are very full service. Like, you're taking care of them with the WAM and understanding about the mental impact on the whole family. Like, I know with Cafe, because I'm working in Cafe, that we have worked with the justice system to push through 50-50 as a bill, like try to get that on the law books, right? And we've been trying to promote the 50-50, and we have all kinds of data and statistics that show how important fathers are to their children, and the importance that it has on civilization, especially with crime, children's health. Children that have a father around have so many benefits, and you have productive children, they're going to grow up and be productive members of society, and it affects all of us that we have fathers, right? When we try to push forward these bills, they always get shot down by, frankly, feminist organizations like National Organization for Women. And it's not like they're hiding it, and they put it right on their website that they're opposed to our bills. And they're also in cahoots with a lot of lawyers that are not like you. And, I could, speculate on why a lawyer would want to be in cahoots with that, but just, to the grapevine, they just kind of, the sentiment is that the lawyers would want the conflict because they're making more money, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't make sense financially that lawyers would be as ethical and have as much integrity as you, but you want them in and out of the office. And like I said, I think you have a lot of integrity, and I think you are not just a good lawyer, but a good person.
Well,
but what do we do with the opposition? Like, that is the bigger picture here, and that's, I think, something he was alluding to with the corruption. Like, we do have feminist organizations that are completely against us, and it's hard for us even to get a platform, because before we can even, try to talk about, and it's very complicated to talk about fathers, and it just branches off into all these issues. Like, it's not something we can kind of have a one-liner to explain to a court why we need to have 50-50 parenting and why fathers are so important, but it just gets very complicated with the politics. But what would you say about organizations that are deliberately trying to block us from shared parenting bills?
Well, I think what Kathy is doing right now and bringing awareness to this issue and men's rights issues is part of the start. And I believe for myself that I have a responsibility. When I know better, I do better. So, or ought to. It's not, always, of course, but that's my responsibility. So my responsibility is in say no to bullshit, which is going to merge into what's called Veritas Coalition, which is Truth Coalition, right?
I just kind of went dead, but I can show you again.
From my experience, once kids' mom and I came through most of it and got talking, there were several cases where each of the lawyers did things just to prolong it.
Oh, I don't disagree with
And
you.
It had to be intentional.
I don't disagree with you,
Yeah.
and the
I'm not saying all.
no, but that's my
Just
experience
my
too.
experience.
That
so,
happens, right?
Yeah.
And lawyers can be the problem in the conflict.
Then again, you guys aren't psychologists either.
Well, we're not,
But you need to be.
but I'm very
Really?
mindful, and in fact, I presented the Conscious Conflict Resolution Program to a group of lawyers in Edmonton in April.
Is that on your website here?
I don't know if it is on my website, but
Yes, back to the human behavior side.
But what I'm part of the problem, part of the conflict that I see that lawyers go through, I believe there's 5 types of conflict. There's the personal conflict that you have just in your own personal life and how that relates to your and how that impacts your profession. There's your professional conflict, so the conflict that you experience. Whether you own your own firm or trying to climb the partnership ladder, there's that kind of conflict. But one of the conflicts is opposing counsel conflict. And so if you're not in alignment with and clear about how you want to practice law as a lawyer, things can go off the rails, right? Because if I approach things from a point of view of respect and integrity and not a doormat, but if I approach it that way, which I try to do, I can only control my behavior. So, but the other lawyer may, in fact, that dynamic, if 2 lawyers are butting heads and take it on personally for their clients, which a lot do in family law, then it certainly can derail the file. And so your job as the client at that point would have to look at that dynamic and maybe change counsel for that reason. And so one of the things that I do with my clients as well is I really include them in all correspondence and I get you to approve letters that I send, drafts of pleadings and court documents that I intend to file, because it's important for you to understand the steps of the litigation and exactly what's involved with it. Because a lot of people will say, I want you to do this, 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 and this. Not realizing how much it's going to cost, first of all, and the implications of that. When you commence a legal action, not necessarily divorce, but if you're commencing like a family law application, and expect a delay in that, especially if the issue is complicated, like determining spousal support or determining child support. If dad has like 3 numbered companies and is self-employed, and mom was stay at home, there's, even though the starting point for child support is line 150, well, how do you determine line 150 when dad has 3 companies that he's changing money, or mom, that person has 3 companies that they're potentially expensing a lot of personal expenses through? How do you get to that point of determining what the appropriate amount of child support is? That process alone can take at least a year or 18 months to figure out. So in the interim, an interim order is usually put into place. But I always say to my clients, I work for you. So I take instructions from you. I try to my job is to provide you with the risks associated with any decision that you're going to make and provide that independent legal advice. So if, for instance, in a division of matrimonial property case, you want a lopsided division of property, such that she's getting more, let's say, if the presumption is 50-50 for a division of matrimonial property, she's getting more. And, I say, well, the law says that you're entitled to fair distribution and equal distribution. And sometimes he'll just say, you know what, I've been married to her for 30 years. This is what's fair for us, right? And I have to honor that, just as long as I can satisfy myself that he, my client, or she, whoever my client is not signing under duress or isn't being coerced, then that's my job to help facilitate that transaction. But I agree with you. A lot of lawyers stymie that process and won't help facilitate it.
Sometimes it's just a document that didn't get over to,
yeah.
And it stirred everything up.
Well, and we're, like, lawyers are human too, right? And so things fall through the cracks, and
you have the full spectrum, the same in the legal business as you do in every other business.
Exactly, right?
Dirtbag mechanics, and you have dirtbag lawyers.
Yeah.
And you have
but one of the
absolutely
things,
incredible lawyers with high integrity, and the same thing in the mechanic business.
so one of the issues that I have, with respect to some family law matters, and quite honestly, is managing the unrealistic expectations of my clients, right? Because I can only do so much. Lawyers can only do so much, and if you want X, there's going to be a cost to it, right? And that's just how the profession has developed. And so it's very clear for you to be aligned with you in an initial consultation about your matter, as much as they're interviewing you in an initial consultation about your matter, as much as they're interviewing you in an initial consultation about your matter, you should be interviewing them about what it is you are seeking. And just because they might say, well, I disagree, or I wouldn't do it that way, I mean, use that opportunity to go and get a second opinion. Because we all have different styles.
Honestly, I don't know how you guys balance it, and just the negativity.
Oh, well, I agree with you, and that's really why
it's gotta be hard.
It's a challenging area to practice in, and it's hard. It's hard to detach from my client's energy in some cases, but that's why I created these programs, because I really want to help my clients move on from the resentment that bottles up, and some people don't even know that they're contributing to the dynamic of the relationship.
They go blind.
For me?
They're so immersed that they go blind to what's happening around.
Well, yeah, when you're too, like even in my family law matter, you know, I had to go out and seek, you know, a different perspective. Like, is my position too hard line, right? Am I not seeing something in this relationship, in my response? And in some cases I wasn't, because I was too close to that situation. But we all have a responsibility to accept and really look mindfully and purposefully at our role in that relationship. And I believe that when people accept responsibility for their part in the dynamic of the litigation, that it shifts the litigation. It minimizes and diminishes the resentment.
Well, the very act of going into the court system, if you can't resolve your conflict without going into the court system, the very act of entering it raises the stakes and the stress and everything goes through the roof.
Totally.
And all it takes is one person
to
do that. If you can't come to an agreement, right? And when you do, and if you do go from a peaceful conflict into the legal system, it's absolutely destructive on men. Way more. I'm not saying some women don't get nailed.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you.
It's usually the whole system is made to be adversarial, because I've seen women make a lot more money than the men, and I've seen them get chewed to pieces.
Well, you know, exactly. So it's not an optimal situation.
Oh, so all I'm saying is I think there's a twofold approach. I think what you're doing is good, but I think there's a political approach that needs to change.
Well, there has to be a shift in how we approach this from a social standpoint. Like, we can say that our values, a government can say that they value families. But what does that look like when there's no funding, when there's no maternity or paternity leave support in a meaningful way? Like, how do our policies and our laws reflect the values that we espouse? And so that's a more esoteric question, but it's certainly relevant, because if we don't address those issues, then we're going to continue just to be in this cog of the same old. There was an article about a month ago in the Calgary Herald, I believe, where they were touting and hooray for the judges for agreeing to sit overtime to figure out the backlog or to manage the backlog of family law cases. Well, that isn't a solution. That is just a Band-Aid of, it's a Band-Aid. It's not a permanent solution, and that's nice and everything, but we have to really, both the court system, the legal system, government system has to look at their role in this, just like the litigants have to look at their role in this. So when you're bringing forward an application, where one is bringing forward an application, check your motives. Why are you bringing this forward? Is it because you're pissed off because he had an affair? Does it have anything to do with the children of the marriage? Like, what is the issue about?
Those issues the court can't do anything about those things. You and I can do something about them. Yes. We can talk to people and say common sense. But the court system can't do anything about why she filed a claim or why he did. But once you get into the system, in the court system, it is meticulously designed from the minute you enter into a lawyer's office till you get in front to extract as much money from the breadwinner and move it.
That happens. It does happen.
It happens all the time. Yeah. And I can point out, every little step of the way from losing tax credits and tax benefits to payments becoming non-taxable for the winner of custody, to everything everything is now taxable. Yeah. So what happens in general is the breadwinner And this is why you even said it yourself. Women tend to use the children.
Yeah.
And men tend to use wealth because that's all men have left once it gets into the system.
Well, both people are in such a state of fear that they'll grasp onto anything that that they seem to have control over.
So when you look at a system that's so meticulously crafted to do something like that, how can you say it's not corrupt?
Well, I don't know if I don't even know if it was intended for it to happen this way, though. That's the issue. I mean, we're all culpable in our experience.
Okay. Well, regardless whether it was intended or it just evolved that way and now needs to be changed, do you think anything will change unless it goes to 50-50 custody? I'm just wondering.
The issue is bigger than that. But yes, I do think it will change. But
the issue is bigger than that. Okay.
It's way bigger than that because it's about turning the entire system on its head. That's what it's about. And this is my opinion,
from
right?
From start to finish.
Totally.
Okay.
And it's about looking at, in my opinion, it's about looking fundamentally at, why we do the things that we do. What are our values? Do our policies and laws reflect the values of our society? And therefore, I mean, when we look at other countries that provide more support for parents, it would be interesting to look at what the correlation is in their court system in terms of the likelihood or propensity to bring forward a case. With divorce, it's difficult because you have to commence an application through the legal system. Perhaps there's a different way to look at, and the family law, like the courts have looked at a family law court and have looked at different things to help provide meaningful change to this problem and solutions to these problems. But it's just never gone anywhere. And it might be because there's no political will, and maybe it's about through associations like Cafe and Say No to Bullshit and other things that we do our part. And so our job is to bring these issues to light.
Right.
And then once we have a common interest, a big enough voice, which doesn't even have to be that big, but it will create momentum. Like change historically, it doesn't happen overnight.
I agree with
right? But we have to start somewhere. And so the fact that we're actually having this conversation today, the fact that She for He is happening next week, the fact that the red pill was created, these are all things that should be championed and need to continue to raise awareness on this issue.
I agree with you 100%. The whole thing needs to be flipped on its head.
Exactly.
If I understand you correctly from a legal perspective, you're starting at that place when the two clients are having problems and they seek out legal advice. If they come to you, you're basically saying, if we work this out before we go to court, it'll be much better.
Totally.
Absolutely. Right?
Always.
So by saying that, it's obviously you'll understand just how devastating court can be once you get into the costs and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Costs are out of control pretty fast.
Everything just gets absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I found shocking was, and I don't blame the judges either, but a lot of times they haven't even read through the affidavits.
Yeah.
Like they're just overwhelmed too.
I agree.
In fairness to them. And I've had some really good judges and I've had some really bad judges.
Yeah, where are you in the system right now?
I'm about 6 years out, so things are more stable, but it can pop up.
So I have a question for you,
anytime.
and you don't need to answer it if you don't want to, but would you have found it helpful for you if you were given a resource of doing some personal reflection in terms of like a conscious conflict resolution program that I offer my clients? Would you have found that helpful from understanding your conflict and litigation?
Absolutely. Like I've kind of made a personal goal of myself. If I know someone's going through a divorce, I'll talk to them. If they're open to talking, I try and help them, especially around the emotional thing. It's like you gotta try and get solid on your emotions
Right,
and not
it's-
let them take over.
And so when
Because I
we,
went there.
yeah, and so when we're in a place of peace in ourselves, it's everything, the ripple effect of that is enormous. So even your approach with the opposing party changes the dynamic of the litigation and the conflict. So it's, I think, an exercise that people need to do more, like with everything, whether you're having a conflict with your 15-year-old daughter or your mother or your employer or your spouse, whatever it is, that purposeful reflection is so necessary, and it's something that we in Western society don't do enough of, right? You know, like there's a lot of talk about, you know, wellness and meditation. I am on board wholeheartedly, but there's a significant aspect of our population that is resistant to that and does not really fully see the benefits of that. So when sick minds are making sick decisions, and I don't say that in an insulting way, but a sick mind can't heal a sick mind, and people don't know what they don't know. So you know, there's an epidemic with addiction. There's problems with debt. Like
There's a lot of social problems.
There's a lot of
that
stuff.
are leading to-
but created a more reflective practice into our lives. Again, it sounds like woo. If we incorporated a more reflective practice into our lives, again, it sounds like woo-woo, but it's not. It really
No,
isn't, because what you're doing is you're connecting with yourself. And when you know that you are enough and that you have enough love for yourself, everything else around you changes. It just happens.
Well, I understand. This is a lot, what you're talking about has to do with ideology and your personal philosophy.
Yeah.
I get that. And you implement that into your business.
Yeah.
I think that's a very healthy thing. Matter of fact, I would say I've subscribed to a lot of what you're talking about for many, many years. But I need a partner, let's say, things can go, you can meet two people who are got a lot in common, and very quickly they can get distracted into a different way of thinking and go down a different path in life, and all of a sudden, how did you get involved? And things can come apart.
Yeah.
So at that point, when they start to come apart, where the relationship is not going, to the point where you go and you pick up a phone and call a lawyer. At that point that you're picking up the phone to call a lawyer, it's not very much longer when you're in court. You know what I'm saying, right? You're caught up in the mess. Let's say. So if I have a partner and she says, "Okay, I'm done with you," and I say, "Okay, I understand that. We need to work this out then. I think we should go get mediation." And she says, "Okay." So you go and you set up mediation, but she's gone to a lawyer. And then when you go, "Well, okay, I have an appointment for start with the mediation process," and she says, "No, I got a lawyer. My lawyer told me if I go through the mediation, I'll get nothing." And then all of a sudden, it doesn't take very long.
Well, and it doesn't, and
it
that's
takes a
why,
long time
and
to
that's-
come to your way of thinking, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the shift. But that's the shift that has to happen. It has to happen in my profession. It has to happen in
Now, if all lawyers had that attitude that you had, so that when that crazy sick person came to you and said, "That's it, I want,"
and I say sick, it's not, I don't
No,
say.
we understand what
It's
you
just-
Emotional sickness.
emotionally
Well, it's
disturbed, traumatized, whatever, a person who's upset, fearful,
Unaware, I would say.
unaware, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And they come to you.
Question two.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a question. It's more of a simpler question. I'm single, and I grew up watching divorces, and I work in an industry full of divorces. I'm oil and gas and oil patch. The question I have is people that sign agreements for common law agreements, for prenups. I've seen lots of them being tossed out of court. People sign them, and she cries in the stand. It's tossed out. She gets half. Are they still even worth getting?
I think so, because you always want to have evidence of what the common intentions of the parties
Because
were,
the
right?
concern I have is I have assets and property that are mine, and if I find someone and she moves in common law, what's it, 3 months, 6 months, and she gets
3 years.
So
It's different for different things. For CRA, it's different. If you have children and you're living together, it's different.
it's a matter of I'm just concerned seeing my childhood. People
Well, let's just start-
selling century houses.
Let's just start from this premise. Nothing is ironclad in my experience.
Mhm.
Okay, so we do our best as lawyers to anticipate the worst case scenario, and we do our best to paper it that way. The dynamic of any, unless I have a specific fact scenario, I'm reluctant to actually provide commentary on what happened in those cases where it's tossed out. But what I think courts do, from my experience, is despite what the law says, there's also a notion, there's principles of equity. So that the courts use, and they use interchangeably, and common law as well. So case law, how are things decided before? What would be equitable in this situation? What is the law, right? So it's kind of like a three-pronged approach, and courts will try to provide the right solution in the circumstances, despite what the law says. And family law in particular is really affected by that, because sometimes, it's hard to anticipate laws or to create laws that are going to serve all parties involved in all fact scenarios. So courts look to what's equitable in the situation. So without knowing the complete fact scenario of what you're talking about,
I was young back then.
but let's look at that scenario though. Like, you and I decide to move in together. We sign a cohabitation agreement. We have independent legal advice. What you bring into the relationship is yours. What I bring is mine. There might be a provision that for any property that's jointly acquired during the cohabitation is divisible.
It's reasonable.
That sounds reasonable, right? So you and I get together, and then all of a sudden I let's say I bring in $500,000 into the relationship, and you're like, no, you know what? I love you so much. I'm never going to go after that. But then when we split, you've lost your job. Let's say, you kind of are like, I'm in a lot of fear over money, and I did a lot during this relationship. How dare she get to keep all that money? Or how dare she get to keep that money exempt? And I'm left with just... So people change, and therefore, my point is, people change.
Mm-hmm.
And their perspective of I love you so much changes, and what's yours is going to be yours changes, and then they think I'm entitled to more.
I've seen they approach one of my friends, my friend Nathan. He's in Williams Lake, BC. Mm-hmm. He owned 6 houses there. He had a live-in girlfriend, but on paper he was single, and she moved in and signed a lease to the tenant. And she tried to go after him for his houses, and as a tenant, she had no claim to them. Is that something that's... I know it seems kind of shady, but...
Well, I need to know the full fact scenario, like I said. Like, it's hard to... it's hard to say, what happened in that situation.
He had a lawyer for a brother.
The more you can do in a common law situation to demonstrate, like, if it is your intention to live separately, like, I'm going to have my bank accounts, you're going to have your bank accounts, I'm going to have my property, you're going to have your property. Mm-hmm. Yes, we will have this limited, bubble of shared resources, but really, I'm self-sufficient. I have my own job, I make good money, you have your own job, you make good money. I mean, those, courts will hold, and you've had independent legal advice, then there's a good chance that agreement will hold up.
Yeah.
Right? So, but where things go off the wire, and anybody can assert anything, and that's the other thing. If somebody comes to me and says, oh, I need this agreement, and it needs to be ironclad, and, I need to know that nobody can challenge it. And I can never give that assurance, right? Anybody can challenge anything based on their experience and plead it in a statement of claim or an originating application. So I can never guarantee that whether or not it's frivolous is another thing, or whether or not it's meritorious. That's going to be, unfortunately, you have to go through the entire system in order to have a judge make that determination. That's wrong. But that's not the court's fault. That's the person bringing forward the application's fault.
I understand that. You had said earlier that women tend to use the children.
Yes.
Men tend to use money.
Yes.
If the court system wasn't, how can you say that in the same breath that it's in the best interest of the children when the kids are being used?
But the parties manipulating the situation in that case, not
and
the
the
courts.
courts allow it.
Well, the courts, I really believe that the courts really try to use the best interest, that's the test, the best interest of the children approach. Now, is there a bias in terms of how that is perceived? Certainly. You know, is the tendency that mom stays at home with the kids still and is a stay-at-home mom and dad's working? Well, practically speaking, if mom is at home and has been at home her entire, let's say 8 years of marriage while the kids are growing up, dad's working, practically speaking, how would that work for the 3, 5, and 7-year-old to stay 50-50 with dad if mom is so there's so many scenarios that come into play, right? And I hear it a lot. Well, my friend got this. And that's fine for your friend, but your situation might be like a banana and theirs might be an orange. So I have no idea the circumstances of that case, right? And why. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about EPOs and how they are used in court?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you bring that up.
What's that?
An EPO is an emergency protection order. Well, an EPO, you obtain an EPO through, you can file, get it through either provincial court or Queen's Bench, and all you have to do is really file an affidavit, attend before a justice or judge or justice of the peace, and get an emergency protection order against.
Saying that your spouse is dangerous.
That's like morning chamber.
And what kind of evidence is needed to?
It's my experience is a very low threshold, and which is too bad. But there's a curing provision on that once the EPO is obtained or the restraining order is obtained, that has to be served on the party who. So if it's the man, it would have to be served on the spouse. And then there's a returnable date. So he has his opportunity at that point to file his affidavit evidence and dispute it.
Mm-hmm.
Domestic violence is such a big issue. But I do believe that people use it sometimes for nefarious reasons.
And
the implications. Well, it's usually, let's face it, it's usually the man who gets the EPO against them.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what, and that's, again, it boils down to the responsibility. Like, emotions run high, right? There's clearly
the responsibility of the individual.
Pardon me?
You say it boils down to the responsibility of the individual.
Well, I would say going through and I personally have experience with this. So when I'm going through that experience and I'm anticipating filing an EPO, right? Filing for an EPO, I really ought to check my motives around that decision, because the implications of that are huge.
Does the motive have anything to do with whether or not they're going to get one? In other words, I'm a person. I want this person out of my house. I want all this stuff. My motive is I'm really scared. Now, I could be scared just basically paranoid when there's really nothing to be afraid of, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, I could be scared and have something really to be afraid of. And number three is I could just want to get them out of my house.
Well, yeah, and
So
I mean,
when you say that
yeah.
it's up to the person, well, that's a conscious thing.
Yeah.
And that's great for me to examine myself individually. But the people who are doing these things unfairly are obviously not examining their conscience.
no,
So
and
what do I do to defend myself against it? Unless the court system is going to say, we require this type of evidence. We're not just going to
well,
give
let's
these
just
out
put it
willy-nilly.
like I'm gonna put it back. I mean, yes, are EPOs used for nefarious purposes? Of course, and I wouldn't agree with that. Like, I wouldn't agree with using that as your sword, right?
Yeah.
As a legal concept to oust the dad from your life, or the partner from your life,
For your children's life.
or your children's lives. I totally understand that, and I actually represent a man right now who kind of went through that situation. Having said that, I can advise that he's not lily white in the scenario as well. Like, and I talked to him about
In that situation.
in this particular situation. Is it necessary sometimes to have an EPO? For sure. Like, there are instances, but is it used for nefarious purposes? Of course.
They have a term for it, yeah. They call it silver bullet.
Well, and it's too bad because oftentimes, or not often, but sometimes, the woman is just pissed off because the relationship is ending, and they just might be enraged and not have their own coping mechanisms to deal with it.
Right.
That's not a reason to get an EPO, right?
But
So
if it's available.
exactly, and so the courts, I think, are more apt to err on the side of caution when granting those, and that's why I believe the threshold.
But they don't.
Well, they do. They grant it. The threshold is fairly low.
Very
But
low.
Is there
Okay,
ever
sure.
an instance when they won't do it?
yeah,
What
yeah.
are they? When do they not do it?
Well,
What process does
you
the
might
judge have to go through to not issue it?
Well, it's all really, it boils down to what ends up typically happening in these scenarios is that either the parties cool down, either the EPO is granted, let's say, and then between the date that the EPO is granted and 2 weeks or whenever the next hearing date is, so the man can get his evidence together. They show up. There might be a cooling off period during that time, and the parties are able to come to some sort of meeting of the minds. But if they're not able to agree to dispense with the EPO at that point,
But it's first issued.
it is
When
first
it
issue.
first goes to court, it's just issued automatically. Pretty well.
Not automatically, but
But either it has to be or not because it's called
Yeah, if there's-
emergency. for a
if there's
reason.
exactly, so if there's
Yeah.
imminent danger and
And she's indicating.
And she's
Usually
indicating
I'm saying
through-
she because it's usually a she.
well, she's indicating
Yeah.
through affidavit evidence, so it's
Mhm.
sworn testimony
Yeah.
that there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the courts, I would think, are going to err on the side of her safety for that 9-day
Yeah.
period. And
So it's issued.
so it's issued.
Yeah. So pretty much
Re-attend.
automatic.
Well,
right?
Yeah, but I mean,
So it
you know, is
is.
she lying? You know, what are the
So it is issued.
I saw
Just
the
based
court-
on her word with no evidence. Is that? how it
Well,
is?
it is, but I mean, you can't, like, I couldn't go into court and say, look, I'm really afraid of my husband. Last January, he,
Or, well, she could say last week.
well,
Or
good,
last
but
night.
she's lying, right? And then that would start the process, and that's an integrity thing for her,
Yeah,
right? Unfortunately,
exactly.
he's brought into
Mhm.
into the system,
Yeah.
but the vetting happens after. So the courts err on the side of caution,
So it's issued
everybody's
automatically.
safety,
Yeah.
not automatically, but
Well,
yeah.
Sounds like it.
And then
I sat through one and for renewal, just in morning chambers.
Yeah.
And the judge just, you could tell she didn't have leg to stand on, he denied it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, it
the
was
judge ended up denying the EPO.
denying her, yeah.
Yeah.
a renewal.
Yeah,
renewal.
exactly.
Now,
So,
what's
but that
the-
doesn't,
what's
but you can see the ripple effect of that, right? The
Oh.
costs associated, the stress,
You know,
the impact on his
This
life.
guy was on the police force too, so.
Yeah,
how did that
it's
affect
really
his
sad.
job, right?
It's really, and really the only way to deal with that is, it usually ends up in a viva voce hearing, which viva voce means speak, like, both parties are put on the stand and give their evidence, because it's really credibility issue, unless you can, like, if there was typically when domestic violence is, and I don't like to speak in generalities, but if the police were involved, they would have received the EPO. They would have obtained it, right? But you're right, anybody can go down and allege that. And that's where the bias comes in as well, right? And so
It
it's
starts at every single level.
yeah.
I know for a fact.
But let's say in that scenario though, that mom is really just angry. And let's say that there's no kids involved, because when kids are involved, they're probably gonna really get that an EPO, because they wanna make sure that the kids are okay. But let's say there's no kids and it's just mom and it's just husband and wife goes in and lies and stuff. Where's the problem in that? The problem is not in the system. The system provides for the opportunity to protect, but let's say she has lied. She's the problem.
Well, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there are people who leave without evidence.
But the
I'll
thing
give
is,
you
but
other-
that's why there's a cure period. That's why it's returnable after a certain period of time, and that's why if there's a dispute, if at that return date there's still the evidence is so conflicting that you can't make a decision, it gets moved to a hearing, so that proper evidence can be provided, and it's usually based on credibility as viva voce evidence.
It's
I'm saying that. So you
It's
can,
impressive to watch these judges. They're good at what they do.
They are. I mean,
They
don't get me
know
wrong.
human
Like
behavior.
our judiciary and our politicians, work hard for what they believe in, for sure, and are very well educated, and I think do their best. We all do our best.
that's what I was asking, the differentiation between the judges and the legal system.
Yeah.
And I have seen countless cases of it's basically what happens to you by the time that there's a system out there, whether people realize it or not.
Yeah.
Part of it is social, part of it is legal. And I can go example after example where guys get locked into it and they're so naive they don't see it coming. And I've said to guys, where are you getting this counsel?
Yeah.
Down at the Sheriff King Center. Are you being be careful, because you're being counseled as an abuser and she's being counseled as a victim. I said, did they ask you if you have a bad temper? Did you get angry? I've seen this happen.
Yeah.
I've seen this stuff goes
Well,
on within the system.
Yeah. Renee?
Can we talk about parental alienation in children as a medical condition too? Like, I know you provide like some aftercare for adults, but like what kind of programs could we do for children? And I don't know if a lot of people are aware of the mental health impact it has on children to go through a high conflict divorce, and what it really means to have a parent kind of lose esteem, like on the mental health of children, and the long-term effect it has on them. And we talk about the parents, but children would be the innocent victim.
Well, and I don't know of really any clear resources other than private.
Yeah, and I find that
opportunities that are available. But
a lot
again,
of these insensitivity of like when you see judges like, and it is very political. I mean, there are lobby groups, like I said, the Now and the women's groups, feminist groups are like, I've heard that they're educating judges and whatnot to kind of see things in a certain way. And if there's like an insensitivity to what it actually feels like for a child to be in that situation.
children get lost in the
and
middle,
they get
for sure.
sick. Like
They
they're
do,
not well.
and I agree with you. But again, that's I think one of those issues where yes, there should be money put forward for that and resources put forward for the children.
And they have to start acknowledging how important.
But it really has to start with how we as a society view that. Like we really just go, well, that's not my problem. We're a society of collective individuals, all operating in silos. At least in Western Canada, like Western.
That's a
Western
bigger
hemisphere.
issue.
It's
So
a
my
big
question-
issue.
if I come to you, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
If you speak the way you speak, and that's your practice, I go, okay, well, my chance of finding a lawyer, okay, everything's going good, and all of a sudden I get served an order, and now I got to go get a lawyer because I've been dragged into the court. Where am I going to go? I'm going to ask friends, family, different people. And trust me, when you go down that, that just asking that question is a dangerous question to ask. But let's say I choose here. The odds of hitting a lawyer who's going to look at me and say, "You guys try to work it out," and
or you're being unreasonable.
So I come find a lawyer being unreasonable, or maybe the other person is being unreasonable. So I come find a lawyer that acts appropriately, because the reaction. Okay, I'll give you a solid example. I come to you and say, look, the wife's not happy anymore, doesn't want to be with me. So she wants to split up, she wants me to do all these things. I think this is fair, blah, blah, blah. And you say, okay, well, maybe you ought to take a good look at yourself, Lance, and this and that. And I say, yeah, totally. And what I want to do, you look at me and say, that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a client. She goes and gets another lawyer.
Yeah.
And this lawyer says, no, we want everything.
Yeah.
Then you have to respond accordingly to that lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? And, there are some pretty nasty tricks that they can do.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm scared.
And do you believe that there are lawyers that actually... So finding a good lawyer, first of all, that represents me is one thing. That will represent me and sees things, for what they are. I would say you got the hard fight on your hands if you were representing me. If they're making false claims and all this.
It's very hard. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I say the thing that scared me was, all these deadlines, and it's court. Like, I've had zero experience with court. Lots of experience now, unfortunately, but
yeah, well, that's a lawyer's job, is to educate you on what court looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the other thing. We don't typically prepare our clients for the long haul. So, I've had clients where I'm like, okay, well, we can go down this road, but be prepared for it to cost $50,000. Is the cost benefit analysis, when you run a resolution to have occurred, is the cost benefit analysis, when you run a resolution to have occurred, is the cost benefit analysis, when you run it that way, is it worth it? Now, people, and this is where I say, like, there's only a few clear-cut cases where there's one person who's clearly in the wrong, in my opinion, right? Like murder, sexual assault, like those things come to mind, right? Where there's really one person that is wrong. There's a lot of gray, right? And so what it boils down to is really people taking responsibility for their own stuff. And I don't like, we take an oath, we're not to promote frivolous and vexatious lawsuits, right? That's part of what we do when we get admitted to the bar. And I really believe in that, because I think that there are lawyers that maybe don't probe enough and end up filing stuff. Certainly self-representatives aren't bound by that same oath. But advancing a case based on wanting to be right,
dangerous.
Like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And
it's true. It's true with people too. They try to argue just to be right, not to listen. That's a bad way to approach things.
Yeah, and I mean there are injustices. I'm not saying, I mean, everything has. I don't want to generalize, but if that's your prime motivation, is to be right and to prove somebody else wrong, I mean, that sometimes there's always, but in family law matters, really clients really need to take stock in the dynamic of their own relationship.
You should put out
Lawyers have to do the same. Lawyers have to become more mindful in a family law scenario, I believe.
You should offer a course for your firm, a premarital, pre-cohabitation course, the same way as self-defense does.
Yeah.
Because if you train in self-defense, what they do is they teach you every aspect of it, and And if you begin to understand that, and then there's the legal component, what can actually happen legally to you, all of a sudden you begin to understand escalation.
Well, wouldn't that sort of course be, I was funny that you say that because I was at a dinner party yesterday and I kind of brought that up about, like, did you go through the values analysis with your partner before you got married, right? Do we do that? No, we're so infatuated.
How about the risk analysis? You're 70% likely to get a divorce. The average marriage lasts between 3 to 5 years.
But we don't do that. And for that, we are responsible.
Well, I have seen, I guess like one that was a few years back, an article online of that was like a 5-year trial marriage they have. Where basically it factors in the marriage, the prenup and divorce. So basically, as you're married for 5 years, when time is up, you sit down, you talk, and if you're not happy, you walk away. There's no division of property.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But people hate the idea because people would say it's not fair, it's inequitable. But it's a matter of...
Okay, well, don't even get me started on marriage. I know this is being recorded, but, is it, like, I see it as just a control mechanism.
The states in your life.
You can pledge your love for somebody and your commitment to somebody without that piece of paper, but, the whole notion that we're with somebody for the rest of our life, and that's a personal thing that you have to reflect on for yourself. But for me, it's like, well, I just think that if I get married to somebody, and I have been twice, and then I want to leave for whatever my reasons, there's the guilt and the shame and the judgment and the blah, 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 that keeps me stuck in this relationship that I don't want any part of, right? And certainly those are some of the feelings that I felt. So really, is it just a control mechanism by the powers that be to keep us in our drone-like state?
Well, do you think
are we just
is good
workhorses, like, to fulfill, paid, like, what is the agenda?
Do you think divorce is good for kids?
I think happy parents are good for kids.
So you don't think, so you have 2 happy parents, and they're married, and they have a certain amount of resources going towards, and then all of a sudden there's the divorce, all the resources that were planned for the child's university, and things, gone?
Yeah, but those 2 parents have at any point in that litigation have a choice.
Well, that's the problem, right?
That's not the court's problem. That's their problem.
No, I say you said, do you think marriage is some controlling mechanism? I'm saying that in terms of raising children, do you think children are better raised by 1 parent or 2 parents? You're bringing your personal beliefs into it.
This is my personal belief.
Yeah.
I think kids benefit from both parents, for sure.
From both parents.
For sure, but that doesn't mean that I need to stay in a relationship where I'm unhappy. But that's me.
But the kids have no choice in that saying. So it's
basically
they didn't ask to be born, they didn't ask to be in your family. Now they're dragged in the middle of this mess. Now their futures are destroyed.
Okay, well, I do think of that, and
it's a concept.
I have an esoteric response for that. It's not legal, but that's
it's not legal.
That's their journey. These marriages is a construct created by the church and government. That's what it's created by. So, but the more we know, the more we learn, the more we look. Like when I got married when I was 22, I'm a different person now at 42, right? So and I've evolved. I like to think.
Okay, so marriage is something that was created around something called reproduction. If we're going to reproduce and raise children, there's a healthier way to raise children, right?
I don't think it was. I would disagree with that. I think I personally believe that it's a control mechanism by the church and the government.
So, since we're into it, you're talking.
No. I don't want to get off track. This is about family law.
You don't want to get off track when someone else challenges you.
No. You asked me a question. I'm happy to have a conversation at a different time about this. Okay. But this is about family law and divorce.
Family law. Yes. Family law.
Yeah.
Tossing the baby.
Can I raise something that I don't know ever gets talked about, and that's kind of a preventative approach to all of this, and what education did I get about relationships?
Mm.
Like, wow, what a powerful spot we could begin with if we had relationship programs in our school. Like, if it was a course that was mandatory,
Yeah.
Relationships,
Now, how-
money.
how to,
Money, relationships.
just how to do your damn
Yeah.
taxes.
I
Right.
know. Well,
What you shouldn't be buying, what
Like-
you should be buying.
but you know what though? Like these are all topics that we need to start reflecting as a society on the veracity of the truth behind what we're being told. And just because one authority says Y doesn't mean Y is correct. And so then, you know, trying to do my part by providing you with my experience, strength, and hope to what I think needs to happen. But, you know, we all have a collective responsibility, I guess, is the message that I want to leave people with. Like, I hope that when I'm in a situation personally, that if it's not going my way, I need to reflect on what is it that I'm doing or not doing that's contributing to that. And is it out of fear? Is it out of self-pity? What is really going on there? And I really believe that until people have the willingness to take responsibility for their own stuff, that will keep looping to some extent. And that goes for like whether or not you're a bank, for the government, for individuals, whatever. We have to, I believe, get to a point where, and I think we will, because I think the world is shifting, and I think that people change only in the face of pain, typically.
They shouldn't have to.
You shouldn't have to, but that's not how we've been programmed. That's not how. That's not.
Would they if everything's comfortable? Why would you change?
Well, exactly. So pain is the touchstone for change. So when things become too painful, then we will see change. So economics, you know, we're seeing shifts in the economy and the environment, political landscape. So when people are like thinking, wow, wait a second, there's the internet, like what a gift the internet is, all the information that we get from the internet. You know, there's a lot of it, and we have to be discerning in terms of what we believe. And I think you'll know intuitively what resonates with you and what doesn't. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we have 10, sorry, we have 10 minutes.
Just one quick question just came to mind concerning back on the EPOs.
Yeah.
If a person does have an EPO on them, is that something that is on their whatever record someone may have, a legal record?
It is.
It is. So that's another bad thing for someone.
Yeah, at the
permanent
EPO
record
level,
they
like you
have.
can do civil restraining orders, and they're not on the criminal system. But yeah, they can have an effect on people.
Yeah. So if it's totally
Or entering
unfounded,
into a P.
even if it's totally unfounded, it sits there.
Well, I mean, I think what the courts would say in that instance is that there is a mechanism to dispute it, and
So
so
that's another big hassle for a person.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, what if they call EPO? Let's say one woman calls an EPO on like, let's say 40 guys, and they're all unfounded. Would that go against her as being someone that puts out fake EPOs and lies all the time?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think you can use evidence from another case or the propensity for.
Or a track record that she's doing this all the time?
Well,
Or even he?
I don't know. I don't know the weight. I don't know how the court would look at in terms of the weight of that. I mean, if it's 40 EPOs against the same person and there are 39 of them are found to be bullshit, then probably the 40th, you know, the likelihood. But I mean, I appreciate what the sentiment behind and the frustration behind your question about EPOs, because, and that just goes to, you know, anybody can assert anything.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a civil matter, you can assert anything, like, and some of the allegations can be completely way off base, unfounded completely, and you still have to defend against them. That's not the court's issue. That, respectfully, is the people issue. Like, people
So isn't there-
need to be honest.
Well, maybe that's a good
Yeah,
question.
no.
If someone asserts a false EPO against me, and I can prove that it was false, can I sue that person?
defamation character?
If someone
It would
accuses me of
depend-
doing
It
something
would depend on,
on my
boils down
evidence,
to what your damages are, right? What are your damages?
or there's no criminal liability for someone falsely accusing somebody of something they didn't do.
Well, I don't practice.
Yeah.
The whole thing, criminal code, like the back of my hand, but,
It's a mess.
the whole thing is a mess.
Yeah.
But we have to start somewhere, so having this conversation today.
Yeah.
I'll just anybody else have any more questions, and then we'll just wrap up for tonight? No? I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
At what age, if my child's a teenager and he's 15, 14 years old, and comes over and says, I'm not living with mom anymore, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm not going to send him home. But I have an order that says he's supposed to be their primary care. What happens then?
Go to court and get it buried.
Well, I'm not going to bring it to court. That would be up to her.
No, it's up to you. Why wouldn't it be up to you?
Because he just wants to come and stay with me. He doesn't
Yeah,
want to live with his mom.
But
I don't care if I'm
unless you
paying
two
the
can
money.
agree to not enforce that order, it should be your responsibility to go to court and have that buried. Say,
Yes.
and the evidence is my 15-year-old son doesn't want to go see his mom. I would say from about 12 or 13 up, children have a lot of influence on the court's decision in terms of where they stay.
Okay, so if my 15-year-old kid comes over and says there's an issue, I won't say what it is, but I'm not going back anymore. I don't want to live with anymore. I'm not going to send him home. The only way I'm going to send him home is if the cops come and pick him up. But of course, if the cops come to pick him up, will they actually take him back home?
Well, let's just play that out to the natural consequences, and you've already stated. So now the cops are involved.
Yeah.
So you have an order that says one thing. Your son says another thing. You're saying you're going to violate the order, the court order. So, in order to fully protect yourself, it's prudent to go get a burying order because of the scenario that you just described.
So if I
Because
go
the
to
cops
court-
are involved, there is an order. They're not going to get involved in a civil dispute without a court order. If the only court order that is presented to them is that your son has to go back to his mom, then, and it
Will they
probably
enforce
doesn't
it
have a
with
police enforcement clause, so there's more to it than that. But it is incumbent upon you. If you guys can't agree and you don't trust her and you don't trust that she's not going to enforce that order, it's prudent for you to go to court to get it buried.
Okay, so if I go to court now, my son has to talk to a judge, obviously.
No, you would file your affidavit evidence.
And my only evidence is what my child says.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I have 3 children and the other 2 want to come over as well,
Yeah.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
They say, I don't want to live with mom all the time.
And then that's where the breakdown occurs, right? Because you're making a court application. You say one thing, your ex-wife is saying another thing, and so the court's like, well, guys, I can't make a decision based on this conflicting evidence, so it's going to have to go to a domestic special, and I want a psychologist report, which is like maybe a practice note 7 report, which is going to cost between 15 and 30 grand.
Why can't they just bring in the kid? Yes.
Well, you can ask because the child needs his or her own lawyer to represent,
Wow.
or have a report to rely on that the judges can rely
They
on.
got every angle covered, they do.
Yeah.
But who has the angle covered? Like, it's the 2 parents that
So
have the
a
problem.
15-year-old kid couldn't come up to a judge and say, this is why I don't want to live, and they won't respect
I would,
without
there
a psychologist being dragged in and
Typically.
spending another $20,000 exactly.
typically.
It's not about
Yeah,
the money,
but
it's
no,
about
no,
the
no, no,
special
no.
interest of the children.
No, but look at, you're pissed off at the legal system for that. But actually the problem is you and your wife. That's the problem.
No.
Well, yeah, it is, because if the wife was truly concerned about the best interests of
Well, you said the
of
problem
your
was
son.
me and my wife.
Well, because you can't agree. So
Well, like
depending
I
on
told you, it only
depending
takes
on the
one
opposite-
person not to
Well,
talk.
exactly. But the thing is, the parties in that instance are the problem. It's not the court system. It's the parties, and maybe one is more culpable than the other. And you're but
I
But I'm
agree with
saying-
you there. But what I'm trying to say is this.
so what is the court
If you got
supposed to do
2
in that
people
case?
and there's a problem, one person won't talk, one person does whatever, so that leaves the other person no choice but to do something about it.
Exactly.
There's a
So the
process
only
there.
thing the only thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go and spend another $20,000 on top of the tens and tens of thousands of
Hey,
dollars.
it's not right.
And
but
you tell me that's not a problem with the legal system?
I really don't think so. It's a problem with the person who's being obstinate.
But,
Like, really?
but in order to hold that person accountable,
Well, how else would you make a decision?
a judge
really?
would ask a kid. Couldn't a judge
Yeah, but
ask
you know
a
what,
15-year-old, does
It
X,
just
Y, and
doesn't-
Z happen in
It
your
doesn't
house?
work. It just doesn't work
No,
that
of course
way.
it doesn't.
I mean,
Yeah,
because they're
it's a legal
minors.
system.
I mean, they need their own protection. There's coercion. There's your own alienation. Like, there's a whole host of reasons why that's
Wow.
not appropriate.
I've been through this crap.
Yep, it's
You're looking
fascinating.
at probably 50 grand each to go to a domestic special.
Totally, it's brutal.
Just a half day.
But then you look at it like so. But when you deconstruct that
But
scenario,
there is a
though,
process.
there's a process
And
if
there
you
has to
want
be a
it.
process.
But when you deconstruct that process, really what the meat and potato of the issues is, it's the two people in the conflict.
Look.
So how do you resolve that? And that is the front ending of what I'm suggesting needs to happen.
And I'm saying that decisions are made all the time in the legal system. You're talking about how, it's our problem. And I'm
No,
saying,
in part.
No,
I'm
just a
saying
minute.
I'm just saying in
You're
part
saying-
it's your problem.
you were
Or
saying,
my problem.
well, you go back and forth, but you're saying that that's the parent's problem. And I'm saying, no, because you need to go to court, spend a fortune money, and there are all these decisions made not on any evidence of somebody doing something, but on hearsay. The kids are taken away, given temporary custody because of some EPO, and then things don't change.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
system is completely corrupt.
I am totally.
And I'm not saying
I
everybody
don't agree
within the
it's
system,
corrupt.
I'm not saying everybody within the system is corrupt. I
Right.
know there are good people in politics, there are not so good people. But the system itself
The system
is
needs
messed
fixing.
up. Yes.
The system needs fixing because it's based on constructs that no longer
Yes.
work, that are based on our values as a
Right.
society that need a complete overhaul. Not the values,
Primary
but the
care.
implementation of the laws and the policies.
Winning primary care. There's a huge motivation to win primary care because you get psychological control and financial control.
Well, yeah.
So
I
that
mean,
sets up an
and this
adversarial
is a
system.
big issue, but I mean, I just want to, we're at 2:00 and I'm mindful of
Oh, right.
everybody's time. Thank you very much for
That was
giving me this
amazing.
opportunity.
It was really amazing.
You can hear how, like this issue is huge.
Oh, huge, yeah. And I'm so glad you came and did this discussion for us. You made a huge difference, and we're gonna show Cafe, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
everybody.
Chris.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Gina.
Catherine,
Thank
for
you.
all the time.
Yeah, thank you.
It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
And I'll tell you, I do